The great hall of Dravenmoor had been dressed for a wedding. That was what they called it. What it looked like was a ceasefire arranged in flowers. The Dravenmoor banners hung on the left, the Valoria banners on the right. Between them, an aisle that both courts had agreed to walk toward each other, which was the maximum amount of agreement either side had managed in 2 years. Seraphina entered the hall in a veil the color of deep water. Not white, not the silver of Dravenmoor tradition. Black, which was either a deliberate insult from Valoria or an omen, depending on which member of court you asked. The whispers began before she reached the altar. The court of Dravenmoor had been told, through the particular channels by which courts told themselves things, without anyone admitting they had said it, that the Valorian bride was veiled because she was cursed, or because she was too plain to be a diplomatic asset, or because the veil was the only thing keeping her from bolting. The court had been told many things. It had not been told the truth. Seraphina knew the whispers. She had counted on them. She walked to the altar at the pace of someone who had practiced the distance, not the pace of a nervous bride, the pace of someone measuring the room. She had known, before she crossed the border, that the veil could not simply be removed. If she removed the veil herself, they would call it performance. If someone tore it from her inside the witness circle, the old law would make every denial answer to the mark. She needed the right person to do the wrong thing in the right place. Alpha King Lucian Draven stood at the altar in the formal gray of his court. He was everything court records said he was. Still, controlled, the specific kind of authority that came from never letting anyone see you uncertain. He looked at the veil and did not look away from it. He said, to the hall, to the vow speakers, to the record that would be kept of this ceremony, this marriage is an alliance, nothing more. He said it the way he said everything that was difficult, clearly, so there was no room for misunderstanding. Seraphina said nothing. She had not come here for him to understand her yet. She had come here to do something the witness circle made possible, and only the witness circle, and for that, she needed to still be standing inside it, when the right person decided to do what she had been waiting for someone to do. She had been waiting since before the hall. She had been waiting since before Dravenmoor. She had been carrying the weight for years, which had made it very heavy, and also had made it very precise. Precision was the only inheritance House Aurelian had been allowed to keep. Seraphina had been raised in Valoria under a different name, in a household that was careful without explaining why it was careful. She had been taught 3 things before she was taught anything else. The first was the mark and how to hide it, and why hiding it was not the same as being ashamed of it. The second was the pact, what it had said, what had been promised, what had been broken, and who had benefited from the breaking. The third was patience, which her guardian had described as the practice of keeping your evidence dry until the room was built to hear it. She had been patient for a very long time. She had been patient through the years when the war between Dravenmoor and Valoria had been a low, persistent threat. She had been patient through the diplomatic failures and the border incidents and the increasingly pointed letters. She had been patient when the alliance proposal arrived, not because she was hopeful, but because she recognized it as the door she had been waiting for someone to open. She had walked through it with her face covered and her purpose intact. House Aurelian did not leave descendants who were imprecise about the things that mattered. The story of House Aurelian was not complicated. An old royal line had stood beside Dravenmoor in the Bloodmoon War. They had provided soldiers, gold, and the specific legitimacy that came from being the older crown when both sides of a conflict needed to explain who was fighting for what. They had done this in exchange for a written pact. The pact had been signed. The war had been won. The pact had been broken. The archive that held it had been burned. The line that might have made the breaking politically inconvenient had been removed from the record and, eventually, from memory. That was the story. Simple in its architecture, devastating in its scale. Seraphina had grown up in the knowledge of it, the way people grew up in the knowledge of anything they were handed as children. It had become the shape of the world before she had the language to question whether the shape was right. She had the language now. She had come to use it. The vow speaker began the ceremony. Lucian extended his hand for the ring exchange. The ring was gold and cold and had been prepared by Cadman's office. It lay in the cushion with the absolute confidence of an object that had no idea what it was a part of. Seraphina looked at it. Lady Marcelline had been watching from the third row since the doors opened. She was Cadman's niece. She had been told that the Valorian bride was an insult to the court, that the veil was a deliberate provocation, and that someone needed to make clear that Dravenmoor would not receive a mystery woman as its queen. She had not been told what would happen to her if she did what she was about to do inside the witness circle. She did not know enough to ask. She moved forward under the pretext of straightening the veil. She took the fabric in both hands. She pulled it down. The room changed. Not because of sound, because of light. The mark on Seraphina's forehead was silver white, precise, the shape of a crown with roots that extended down her temples and to the inner face of her wrist. It was not illusion. It was not makeup. It was not a Valorian ceremony tradition. It was the mark of House Aurelian. And the 6 elders of Dravenmoor, who still carried the oath made to that house, felt it before they understood it. Elder Thorn went down on one knee. He was followed by 5 others. They did not look at each other to decide. They went down because the oath they carried did not give them the option of staying upright in the presence of the bloodline it had been sworn to protect. The hall did not understand why the elders were kneeling. The elders had not explained themselves. They had simply gone down. The 6 most senior members of the Dravenmoor court, men who had survived the Bloodmoon War, who had advised 3 generations of the Draven line, who had been present at the decisions that had shaped everything this court believed about itself. They were on their knees, not in the way people knelt at ceremony, in the way people knelt when they did not have a choice. The court of Dravenmoor looked at this and did not know what it meant, and the not knowing was the most effective silence Seraphina could have planned, because it left the room with nothing to do but watch the mark on her skin and wonder what the people with the oldest oath in the building had just confirmed. The whole court did not understand why the elders knelt. The rest of the court did not kneel with their bodies. They knelt with their silence. That was what made it worse. Seraphina said, "Now you see why they wanted the veil to stay." Lady Marcelline said it was magic. She said it loudly, because loudly was the only tool she had left. She said Seraphina was using illusion, that the mark was painted, that it was a trick Valoria had prepared to humiliate the court. Sedmon, from his place near the side door, said the bride should be taken into custody for examination. He said it smoothly. He said it the way he said everything that was meant to sound like procedure. Seraphina did not ask Lucian to defend her. She walked to the edge of the witness circle. She extended her wrist. She placed the marked skin inside the circle and waited. The witness circle was not a decoration. It was a constraint built into Dravenmoor law, at a time when oaths were taken seriously enough to require a physical space in which denial had a cost. The mark on Seraphina's wrist responded to the circle the way marks responded when they were real. It burned brighter, then settled into its permanent color. Not performance, verification. Lucian had not moved. He was looking at the mark the way a person looked at something that required them to reorganize several things they had believed to be settled. Elder Thorn said, "The mark belongs to House Aurelian, the bloodline we swore to serve, the bloodline that was removed from every royal record this court holds." Lucian said, "Why is there no record of them?" Thorn said, "Because your father burned the pages that named them." He said it without flinching. He said it the way someone said something they had been keeping for a very long time and had run out of reasons to keep any longer. He said, "I survived by letting history die. That is not innocence. I have known that for 40 years. Seraphina said, "I did not come veiled because I was ashamed. I came veiled because truth survives longer when liars think it is still hidden. Lucian looked at her. He said nothing yet. He was a person who needed to understand something before he spoke about it, which was either a quality or a flaw depending on how much time was available. He extended his hand for the ring again. He read the first line of the vow Kedman had prepared. The ring stayed cold. The ring stayed dark. He stopped. Seraphina said, "Even the ring knows this vow was written to make me kneel." She said it quietly, not triumphant, stating a fact. The ring had not accused anyone. It had simply failed to confirm a promise that was not a promise. Prince Rowan of Valoria had been standing near the Valorian banners since the ceremony began. He was not the kind of person who announced himself. He was the kind of person who waited to be necessary. He was necessary now. He produced a letter from his coat. It was half of something. A formal letter from Valoria to Dravenmoor, cut precisely down the center, with the royal double seal visible on the remaining portion. He said, Valoria sent a letter proposing joint administration of the border mining territory. The letter was received at this court 6 weeks ago. What we received in return was an ultimatum that implied Dravenmoor was preparing for military action. He said, "This is our half, the seal matches. The proposal does not match what your court says Valoria proposed." Lucian looked at Kedman. Sedman said the letters had been handled through normal diplomatic channels. He said it with the patience of a man who had handled many things through normal channels and relied on no one checking. Lucian said, "Then the normal channels will show me both halves." Kedman said, "Opening the archive in the middle of the wedding ceremony was an insult to the marriage and to the court." Lucian said, "If my throne can only survive with sealed doors, then it is already weaker than I thought." He left the altar. The hall made the sound halls made when something unexpected happened, and no one was certain whether it was an emergency or a revelation. He walked through the sound without acknowledging it. He had been the Alpha King of Dravenmoor for 8 years, and he had learned in those 8 years that the most important thing a king could do was not let the room decide what he was thinking before he had decided it himself. He went to the diplomatic tower with 2 guards and his own key. He had never had cause to override Sedman's access before. Sedman had been the one who managed diplomatic correspondence. Kedman had been the one who briefed the council. Sedman had been the one who sat beside Lucian's father in the years after the war and helped design the arrangements by which Dravenmoor had consolidated its post-war advantages. Lucian had not thought about this before. He was thinking about it now. He found the second half of the letter in a correspondence file that had been sealed with Kedman's office mark. He brought it back to the hall. The 2 halves matched precisely. The proposal had offered joint control of the silver mines at the border, shared customs rights, and a formal acknowledgement that the previous war's terms had favored Dravenmoor disproportionately. The letter Lucian had received had contained none of that. It had contained a threat. A healer from the border garrison who had been brought in as a neutral examiner looked at both documents. She looked at the ink. She said, "The ink on the modified version contains silver ash from the eastern ore deposits. The eastern ore deposits were controlled by a consortium. The consortium's records, when Seraphina produced the summary she had carried from Valoria, listed its founding members as a set of family names that had accumulated land, title, and mining rights in the decade following the Bloodmoon War, the same decade in which House Aurelian had been removed from the record." Seraphina said, "The Iron Howl had not been born from war. It had been born from the prophets no one wanted audited after the last one." She said, "Sedman is one of them." Lucian had been quiet for a long time. He said, "Show me the war record." Seraphina led him to the archive room below the hall. The Bloodmoon Pact was there, in pieces. The sections that should have recorded House Aurelian's contribution, the terms of their agreement, and the guarantee of their continued sovereignty had been torn away. The tearing was old. The edges were brown with time. But the stitching where the pages had been bound showed exactly what had been removed, and exactly how much had been deliberately left to prevent the archive from looking incomplete. Lucian stood in front of it for a long time. He looked at the torn edges. He looked at the binding stitching and what it showed about where the pages had been. He had been told, growing up, that the Bloodmoon War had been a defining moment for Dravenmoor, that his father had led the kingdom through its most difficult hour, that the peace afterward had been hard won and justly held. He had not been told that the hard winning had required a co-signatory who had then been erased. He looked at the torn pact. He looked at the empty spaces where the pages had been. He was not angry at Seraphina. He was angry at the shape of the thing, at the architecture of a lie that had been built carefully enough to stand for 40 years and look like history. Seraphina did not rush him. She had waited years. She could wait a few more minutes. By the time they crossed the threshold again, Cadmon had turned procedure into a barricade. He had done it smoothly. He was very good at doing things smoothly. The council members who relied on him had moved toward positions that looked coincidental. A document had appeared on the vow speaker's table that had not been there before. Cadmon himself stood near the center of the hall with the composed expression of a man who had managed difficult situations before and had always found a procedure to contain them. He had spent 30 years building a system which procedure was the answer to every problem. The system had served him well. He was about to learn that witness circles were not interested in procedure. When they returned to the hall, Cadmon had reorganized the room. He had moved council members into positions near the exits. He had produced a document that he said was a formal council motion to declare the ceremony invalid on grounds of foreign interference. He said it calmly. He said it as though procedure would protect him the way it always had. He said to Lucian, in the specific tone of someone who had been whispering advice into powerful ears for 30 years, "If you acknowledge her bloodline, Dravenmoor loses every trade claim we have from the post-war settlement. If you acknowledge the pact was broken, Valoria will demand restitution that will take generations to pay. Peace makes people ask who profited from the last war. That question costs more than the answer." Lucian said, "It costs the truth, which is different from what you think it costs." Cadmon had one more tool. He had sent a rider to the border before the ceremony. The rider carried Iron Howl authorization for a military action at a Valorian checkpoint, small enough to deny, large enough to provoke. Rowan's signal device activated. Someone at the border was reading smoke. If Seraphina did not have the vow signed before the border report reached both armies, the armies would interpret the morning as proof that the other side had struck first. The hall understood, suddenly, that the wedding had become something else. Seraphina said, "I did not come here to wear your crown. I came because another war would bury the last proof of the first betrayal." She said it to the hall, not just to Lucian. Marcelline, standing near the witness circle, had gone quiet. Seraphina looked at her. She said, "The witness circle is still active, and you are still inside it." Marcelline said, after a moment, that Lord Cadmon had told her the veil was an insult, and that Dravenmoor's dignity required a response. She said it in the flat voice of someone who understood, now, that she had been the most convenient instrument available. Cadmon had not invented the court's contempt for the veiled bride. He had known exactly where to apply it. Seraphina said, "The border will not wait for the truth to be comfortable. Tell me what you need to sign." She looked at Lucian. He was looking at the broken pact from the archive room, which he had carried back with him. He said, "My father's crown was not innocent simply because it won." He said it to the court, not to Seraphina specifically, to the court that had benefited from what his father had done. He let the words sit in the air. He did not soften them. He did not add a qualification about circumstances or necessity or the complexity of wartime decisions. He had been taught that a king never apologized in public because apology looked like weakness. He had decided, looking at the torn pages from the archive, that there was a specific kind of weakness that looked exactly like refusing to apologize. To the room that had mistaken inherited silence for innocence, he said, "I inherited the throne. That means I inherited the duty to answer for what kept it standing. The court did not love this. Several members of the council said it. Several of them were standing near the exits Kedmon had arranged. Lucian said, "Then they can leave. The witness circle does not require their agreement. It requires their witness." He turned to Seraphina. He said, "This began as a marriage I did not choose. It will not end as a lie I refuse to see." He said, "Tell me what the vow should say." She told him. She did not ask for more than the truth required. She asked for a formal acknowledgement of House Aurelian's claim, shared administration of the border territory, equal standing in the Alliance Council, an investigation of Iron Howl and its post-war holdings, and a double seal requirement on all future diplomatic correspondence. She did not frame any of it as a gift from him. Lucian understood the difference. He said to the vow speaker, "Write what she said." Exactly what she said. Kedmon moved toward the altar. He reached for the ring. The ring was still on the cushion where the ceremony had paused. When his hand closed around it, the temperature in the witness circle changed. Not dramatically, not with a sound. Kedmon had been preparing to speak. He had a speech ready. Something about procedural validity and the rights of the High Chancellor in contested ceremony. He had always had a speech ready. He stopped speaking. When his hand closed around it, the ring turned black, not dramatically, not with a sound. It turned black the way things turned when they had been touched by something that left a mark, and the mark could not be undone. Kedmon released the ring. It was too late. The witness circle had registered the contact. The oath tampering he had built into the original vow, the modifications to the Valorian proposal, the altered alliance terms, the staged insult, had been attached to the ring from the moment it was prepared. The ring did not invent guilt. It remembered every hand that had altered the vow. When he touched it, they were attached to him. The vow speaker read the record aloud. Each modification, each falsified letter, each instruction to Marcelline, the order to the border, the founding charter of the Iron Howl, and the names of those who had signed it. Kedmon said nothing. He had spent 30 years knowing exactly what to say and when. He had run out of the when. He was taken by the guard. Rowan sent the vow north by royal flare. 2 armies, on opposite sides of a border they had been told to prepare to cross, received the same light in the same sky. The Iron Howl unit, that had been authorized to strike a Valorian checkpoint, found itself surrounded by both Valorian and Draven troops, who had, very recently, been told not to fight each other. The Iron Howl unit arrived at the Valorian checkpoint at dawn, and found that they were not the only ones who had arrived. The Valorian Border Company had received the royal flare. So had the Draven garrison stationed 3 miles east. Both units had received the same light in the same sky, and had understood it to mean the same thing. The vow was signed, which meant the incident was unauthorized, which meant the people conducting it were not acting on behalf of either kingdom. The Iron Howl unit was surrounded before they had fired a single shot. The skirmish did not become a battle. The battle did not become a war. Lucian and Seraphina placed their hands on the ring together. It was not a moment of love. It was a moment of people who had both decided that the truth deserved to be said out loud even when it was inconvenient, which was a more durable foundation than love at first sight, and considerably rarer. The ring sighed. It sounded like something that had been waiting. It sounded like something that could finally, having been asked to hold an honest promise, do the thing it had been made to do. It lit. In the days after, Dravenmoor was not comfortable. Comfortable was not what the truth tended to produce on arrival. The council members who had benefited from post-war settlement terms found themselves in conversations they had not expected to be having. The investigation into Iron Howl produced records that were extensive. The archive that had lost its pages did not get them back, but the court record acknowledged what had been there, which was not the same as restoration, but was the beginning of one. Seraphina did not move into the Queen's chamber. She moved into the council chamber. She said the distinction mattered. She was right. A maid brought her the veil from where it had fallen. She looked at it for a moment. She put it over her shoulder, not over her face. It lay against her like a banner, black against the formal wear she was still in from the ceremony that had not ended the way anyone had planned. Lucian found her in the corridor, carrying the veil like that. He said, "This marriage began as a treaty written around you. If it continues, it will be a kingdom built with you." She said, "Then begin by never mistaking my silence for surrender." He said, "I have learned not to mistake what I don't understand for what doesn't matter." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "That is a better beginning than most kingdoms manage." She did not say she forgave him. She did not say she loved him. She said that a beginning, if honest, was more than enough to start. He asked, eventually, whether she had wanted to leave after the vow was signed, whether she had stayed for the kingdom or for something else. She said, "I did not come here to be your bride, but I may stay to become your equal," he said. "Then I will spend every day proving this alliance deserved your courage." It had not been a long conversation. That was one of the things about conversations that mattered. They did not need to be long. They needed to be honest. And honest conversations had a specific economy. They said exactly what needed to be said, and then they let it land. This one had landed. Seraphina had been prepared for a great many things from this court, from this marriage, from this king. She had been prepared for denial and for negotiation, and for the specific kind of respect that powerful men extended to women they acknowledged as competent, while still assuming the competent woman was working within a framework the man had approved. She had been prepared for all of that. She had not expected him to say it like that. Expected politics or pragmatism or the specific language of men who were grateful in ways they did not know how to name. She got something different. She got someone who understood that courage was the word, and that the only right response to it was to say so. The court had expected a veiled bride to kneel for peace. Instead, when the veil fell, the truth stood taller than every crown in the room, and the marriage that had been called an alliance, nothing more, became the first honest vow either kingdom had spoken in generations.